because he didn't have the authority to do it. And then the Indians were given 160 acres. But now this is whites. Abraham Lincoln signed a law that, and this applied to whites, that anyone, mostly for whites, who went on government land and settled on government land would get the land after 5 years, provided you could stay there 5 years. Now, there was a problem with that act. The good land was swallowed up right away. Now, they had what's called a land rush, and they told about people rushing. But as soon as the gates were opened, like to Kansas City, I mean, the settlers rushed in to try to get some of the best of the land. The best of the land was taken up really quickly, and your ordinary farmer didn't have much of a chance of finding good land. The land in the Great Plains, where that this Homestead Act applied, it was, here's the story on it, it's kind of sad. Back east, right here, you can put 1 horse per acre, or 1 cow per acre. So if you have 10 acres of land, you can graze 10 head of cattle on that land. They tried to go to the Great Plains and put 1 cow or 1 horse per acre. Didn't work. You really needed 5 acres per 1 cow or 5 acres per 1 horse, owing to the fact that there's not as much rainfall there. The Great Plains is like half desert. They have a little bit of rain, but not enough. So the farming was not as good, and the crops did not yield as much, so it really was not that great. And on a personal note, 2 of my great-grandfather's brothers went out to Nebraska, and they got some land, I say 160 acres of land, which they wound up giving to my great-grandfather because they went on to Washington, the state of Washington. They moved farther west because the land in Oregon and Washington was, particularly west of the Rockies, was better than the land they were farming there in Nebraska. Nebraska farmland is not the best, and you see a picture of a sod house, but the Homestead Act of 1862 would give 106 acres to any citizen or anyone who might be a citizen. That means anyone who from abroad who had a chance to become a citizen, male or female, who would work the land for 5 years. Then the railroads began to open up new lands for settlers. But the houses were made of sod, and this book shows a picture of a sod house. What is sod? Sod is prairie grass, prairie weeds, and dirt. They take this prairie dirt, this first layer, and put it together like brickwork. So basically the house was made out of grass and dirt, or weeds and dirt, you might say. And the hog-nosed snake was a common occurrence. I mean, if you don't have hog-nosed snakes, they have a nose that kind of looks like a hog nose, hence the name hog nose. The hog-nosed snake is not venomous, but they don't seem to mind getting into your houses if they can. And the hoe became a common used tool, if any of you know anything about snakes. If the problem, I see a snake, solution, get out the hoe. Yeah, get out the hoe. And many a snake found himself on the wrong end of a hoe, had his days on earth shortened. But Mother would grab the hoe, and after the fight was over, Mr. Bull Snake was dragged outside. Some of these houses were partly underground, so they wouldn't have to build so high. They'd dig about 3 or 4 feet underground and then build the rest of the house up from there. And of course, this made for even more of a problem with snakes. Water was scarce. Creeks, a woman would have to go maybe for a mile or 2 to get some water from a creek or a spring. The water came from creeks or springs. Your book shows a map of the railroads. Wait a minute. Yeah, and I'm looking at page 449. Eventually, well, there was a railroad built in what was the Gadsden Purchase. The Southern Pacific. There was the Southern Pacific, the Northwest Pacific, and the Central Pacific, which was another name for the Transcontinental Railroad. But there were 3 railroad lines built all the way to well, the northern one went to Washington and Oregon. And then there was the southern road went to Southern California, and the middle one went to central part of California. Well, actually went to San Francisco, the central part of California. So railroads began to connect, and of course this meant for faster transportation. Wells Fargo, which was once a mail delivering company, ceased to be a mail deliverer. The mail was now delivered by train. Wells Fargo became something else.
How do they get into money and all this?
I'll be honest, I don't know the details, except I do know this. Our home is financed through Wells Fargo. But it's the same company that once carried mail out to the West. Now, I know what happened. I mean, I think there was technology forced their stagecoaches out of business. I mean, the stagecoach could not compete with the rail, even the steamship. The rail locomotive could go, the train could go 60 miles an hour on level ground. It would average 40 miles an hour. A stagecoach couldn't do this at all. So that forced them out of business. And unlike the Pony Express was where they used horses and kept the mail moving all that. It took a week to get the mail from Independence to San Francisco. And again, the horses have a station, and where the rider would, sometimes they changed riders, sometimes horses, but they keep the mail moving constantly. But then Wells Fargo, which was much slower, came along. But Wells Fargo, I think, realized we can't continue the business we're in, so they had to change to something else. Wells Fargo, though, made a lot of money. And there was a Western TV show called Wells Fargo one time. Anyway. Now, cattle. A lot of you Western farmers took up cattle, particularly in Texas. The Texas Longhorn had a horn span of 7 feet from tip to tip. They don't raise Texas Longhorns anymore. The Texas Longhorn had a problem. They didn't have as much beef as the other cattle did. But the Texas Longhorns, they carry them up the Chisholm Trail from Texas to Dodge City. Dodge City became what's known as the cowboy capital of the West. And they'd go up the Chisholm Trail. And when I was a kid, I read books about the Chisholm Trail. Sometimes the cattle would stampede. The farmers, to keep the cows out, began to putting up barbed wire fences. And these barbed wires were mean, particularly when the cattle were so thirsty they couldn't even see anymore. And the cattle could smell the water, and they'd tear their skin to pieces, trying to get past the barbed wire before their cattlemen would. The cattlemen would use the ropes eventually and their horses to break the barbed wire fence in two. And they had wire cutters, and then let the cattle through to the water hole. By the time the cattle were through drinking, there wasn't much left for the farmer. There was a fight that went on between the farmer and the cattleman. The cattleman practiced open range farming, in other words, just let your cattle go anywhere. And every once in a while they have a season called the branding season. Branding was where they would take a hot iron with a logo, like it was Circle K. They'd have a logo like this, the Circle K Ranch, a circle with a K on it. And they would stick this hot iron on the cattle's rear end, and that way the cattle was permanently scarred there, and that would be the brand. And of course, a lot of cattle rustlers would pay no attention to the brand name, but when it came roundup time, they'd go around all the open range, and each cattle farmer would look for the cattle that had his brand on it. They'd round those up. Then they marched these cattle off to market. By the time the cattle got to market, they were pretty lean from the marching, and the beef was healthier than a lot of the beef we eat today. It had less fat on it, and the cholesterol, they did not have as many problems with heart attacks as was to happen later. Now, in recent years, we have cut down on the number of heart attacks, owing to the fact we know more about what causes them. But those cattle, beef cattle, were leaner than today's cattle. But anyway, they'd walk these cattle up the trail. Eventually, the refrigerated car was invented to where the cattle could be slaughtered right there in Dodge City, and the meat carried in refrigerated cars back east. Before that, though, to keep the meat fresh, they had to keep the cattle alive and load up the cattle on train cars, and the cattle were carried by train back east. And there they were slaughtered and sold to market. And of course, I've been criticized for jumping around, but I feel like I have to. Today, there's a move on to get people to not eat beef anymore, because supposedly cows release carbon dioxide in the air that is going to warm up the planet.
What?
Yes, that is going on. I mean, that beef cattle put out so much carbon dioxide due to cattle flagellation, to put out so much carbon dioxide that it's going to wind up heating up the planet. Yes.
I think it's actually methane.
Say that again louder.
Yeah, same. It's actually methane.
No, their defecation and stuff break down, it still creates like a methane cement there. Yeah, it's
Methane,
yeah.
yeah, carbon dioxide, methane, yeah. That's the logic. So basically they want us to stop eating beef and kill most of the cattle that's on the planet. Maybe leave a few around because of whatever reason, but that's the idea. And to me, I think it's the whole idea is to impoverish us all and make the nation weaker. Because the United States has stood against some of the globalist plans to conquer the world. And the United States has resisted. So the main country you got to get rid of if you want the whole world to unite and bring about peace on earth is you've got to defeat the United States. And the best way to do that, go ahead and laugh, but the best way to do that is to convince us that we need to have fewer people, we need to kill 1/4 for babies, we need to get rid of, stop eating cattle, stop eating beef. All this, and again, each of you can make up your own mind what you think about it, but this is, folk, on your test. Now, we're going to get a good taste of global warming beginning on Sunday here, but now, hey, there's a huge snowstorm coming in from California, and only 3 states might miss it. Those 3 states are Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. We're going to have it colder, but this is a late winter storm that's going to go all the way from California to Maine. Have any ever heard of it? Starting this week? It's starting about now. What's that?
I heard about the cold weather front.
Yeah, the cold weather's coming here, but we will probably not get snow, but the snow is going to go all the way across. And it's kind of late in the season for that, but again, all right. Personally, folk, I want to remind you, the climate is always changing. The climate goes up, and it goes down, and it goes back up, and it goes back down. And I believe it always will. All right. Barbed wire. Yeah, the barbed wire was invented in about 1874, and it did a lot to, well, it revolutionized the cattle business. Now, I mentioned the open range, and the fight between cattleman and farmer, it lasts the whole generation. In the long run, the farmer won, owing to the fact that some really terrible, horrible winters came, and farmers lost their cattle, and farmers saw the wisdom of trimming their herds and building barns. I mean, not farmers, the cattlemen saw the wisdom of trimming their herds, building fences, building barns. When the cold weather came in, just put the cattle in barns. They could survive any storm in a barn, more so than humans could. Put these cattle in barns, and that way they'd have them, rather than let them roam. And also, open range farming will not work in today's automobiles. All right, if you go travel through Mexico, I don't know how true this still is, particularly if you travel at night, you run the risk of hitting a cow. Yes, cattle rough still. Now here we have laws. Now we had a case just about a year ago where a bunch of cattle got loose in the cattle truck. And one of them, it took them a month to capture. Nobody quite knew how to round up cattle. This actually happened right here on I-285 here in Atlanta. Some of you might remember it. But, some cattle got loose from a cattle truck, and the police, again, they tried to get some farmers who knew something about rounding up, but nobody quite knew how to do it the way they did in the old days. Use horses and ropes and lasso the cattle and bring them in. I mean, we don't do that anymore.
And cattle, they're not afraid of you. You know, I thought it would be easy because, you know, watching television, all you do is go, yah.
I know, yeah. That didn't work. Didn't work. Anyway, all right. The cowboy. Oh, yes. The cowboy, again, a lot of you Westerners, some Western movies depicted the cowboy. The cowboy oftentimes carried 2 guns, one on each side, and he was an excellent shot. But there was a lot of fights between cattlemen and rustlers. Rustling cattle was a big business. Like I say, the Earp brothers, when they had to shoot out at OK Corral, the men they shot dead were cattle rustlers, some other things. But there was very little law, especially since a lot of these territories had not been admitted to the Union as states. So there wasn't all that much law, and a lot of them went wild. Anyway, cowboys. Well, let's see. Oh yeah. Eventually, the reaper came to the west also. Mechanized farming came in. Oh yeah. While I'm on the subject of Great Plains, I want to tell you something else. When they started overgrazing the land, they were putting one head of cows or one horse per acre in the Great Plains. The cattle and horses ate up all the grass. This was to lead to the huge dust storms in the 1930s, where the dust blew from the Great Plains and covered the east. In the Great Plains, it was so bad that a lot of people choked to death on the dust. But even my dad told me, it even affected Pennsylvania. It got all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Georgia did not escape. Now, we had some dust storms in the 1970s here in Georgia that came from the same place, over dry prairie land that was over-farmed, eventually led to the wind blowing and blowing that dust all over the country. But it choked a lot of people to death, and they did not have gas masks, so there was really no real relief. Now, some people were able to seal off their houses to where the dust could not get in, but still, when cold weather came along, they had to build fires, and they ran a risk of dying from carbon monoxide fumes if you didn't have proper ventilation. So the dust storms were really, really mean. Your large landowner became a big issue in the West. In fact, your book says that 1% of the land of the 1% of the population in California owned half the land. When the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, Mexicans, Filipinos, and Japanese became our workers in the West. And again, folks, the reason I bring this up is this issue of foreign workers is nothing new. Now, let me hasten to state, my roof started leaking about 2 years ago. It was in July 2017. We called a roof repairman out, and the roofer said, "Hey, I think you're eligible for insurance." So we called out Liberty Mutual sent an agent, and I promised them, I said, "I've never been on the top of my roof. I'm too chicken. Neither me or any of my family have ever been on our roof," which was true. But the insurance agent determined that the roof was damaged by wind damage. So we collected the insurance money and put a new roof on. Who put the roof on? An American businessman who hired Mexican workers. I see at least one head nodding. You understand what I'm talking about. Well, just this morning, I was going to stop at McDonald's about 3 or 4 miles here for breakfast, where I usually stop. I went inside, and there was a line of Mexicans, and I'm not knocking them, I'm just saying the line of Mexicans all the way back from the counter to the door. I said, "No, that's not for me," so I left and went to Dunkin' Donuts instead. But anyway, the point I'm making is you see them all over the place. They're here, and I'm not knocking it. It's up, eventually our government's going to have to decide what to do. How many of them are legal, how many of them are illegal, I have no idea. I don't know. When you turn your papers in, I will be talking about this issue more. It's a hot issue. But how much we should let them in. But they are coming, and they're doing work that Americans won't do. See one head, they're doing the work. I mean, how many American young boys are trained to be roofers anymore? Not many of them want to do it. That's like I told them. I mean, when I lived at a one-story home for 20 years, I'd climb that roof. The roof was only 8 feet off the ground, 10 feet at the apex. My roof right now is 20 feet off the ground, 24 feet at the apex. I've never been on it. I don't want to get on it. I'm not that kind of man. I mean, once I got off the ladder, I could never find, I couldn't get back on. I'd freeze. Now, when the roof was only 8 feet up off the ground, I could get back on it. But if you've been on a ladder on a roof, and then try to get back on a ladder, if you're 20 feet up, yeah, oh yes, I have done it. One time a friend of mine hired me to do some painting for him up 16 feet. He said, "This will make you glad to get back to your teaching job." I was a young man. All right, anyway, but these people from abroad, they'll do it, and these Mexicans fixed my roof, no problem, and they were able to get 4 by 8 ply boards that had rotted away, down and up. How in the world did they do it? I don't know, because I didn't have the courage to watch them. No, we had another case last March. One of our cats got stuck in a tree and couldn't get down. We called a man out who specialized in that. Who was his workers? About 3 or 4 Mexicans. They got the cat down.
Why do you call
$100.
Why do you call the fire department?
The fire department wouldn't come out.
They don't do it anymore.
They don't do that anymore. No, the fire department didn't come out. But these people, I mean, they did it. $100. Anyway. All right. Again. Now, I told them I was studying Spanish, and I tried to speak Spanish. People have laughed at my Spanish, including my brother. I said it's un gato negro. No, I should have said una gata negra. Una gata. It was a female cat. Yeah. Not un gato, but una gata. All right, I'll leave it at that. Some of you might know more Spanish than I do. All right. Yeah, anyway. All right. Gilded Age. All right, we'll move, we're through this chapter. I'll move on to chapter 18. By my watch, I have 25 more minutes. So, chapter 18. Maybe when you were younger, you read about Mark Twain. I know I'm talking to a lot of persons who are not Americans. We ran into Mark Twain a lot when I was coming up through the grades, even in high school. Mark Twain was an American humorist and an author. Grew up near the Mississippi River. And yes, when my first daughter was really small, my wife and I visited Mark Twain's home and the place where he wrote. Mark Twain was the first author that we know of to use a typewriter. The typewriter had been invented more than 100 years before, but before this time, authors would use pen and paper, oftentimes quill pens, to write their books, and then depend on a typesetter to typeset for them. Mark Twain,
As one like using a feather ink or writing.
feather ink a lot of times, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they dip their feather in an ink pot, and but anyway, Mark Twain used a typewriter, and this became fashionable. After a while, editors got to where they required use of a typewriter.
Why is Mark Twain such an important part of America?
Essentially, okay, he was a humorist, and he was very, very, all right, he was a writer. Some writers make it to the top, become famous and popular, and sell a lot. And again, if you read his books, maybe you can tell why. His famous character was Tom Sawyer, and Tom Sawyer's buddy, Huckleberry Finn. Now, how many of you have ever read anything at all about Tom Sawyer by any chance? I mean, again, the younger people, okay. But Tom Sawyer got himself into all kinds of humorous situations, as did his friend Huckleberry Finn. And also, Mark Twain emphasized a lot of the hypocrisies and the idiosyncrasies of Christianity. Mark Twain was an atheist, and he poked fun a lot of Christian beliefs and Christian ways and Christian habits. I'll say this too about his atheism. He had a son by his, he and his wife had a son. At 2 years old, this son became deathly ill. He had converted his wife to atheism, but he finally told his wife, said, "Look here, if it helps you to have faith in God in this time of crisis, by all means do so." Atheism typically breaks down in moments like this. Anyway, the son died. But Mark Twain was very important at the time because he was popular. His books were widely read, widely sold, and talked about a lot. And regrettably, as time goes on, we homeschool our children. 2 of them can tell you who Mark Twain was and who Tom Sawyer was. The younger one had a much more difficult time with him. He just does not take much interest in literature. But if you take literature, American literature, you'll run into names like Mark Twain. And oh yeah, I looked him up. I was going to teach you about Edgar Allan Poe, but I looked up Edgar Allan Poe was not in our book.
The guy who wrote the Raven, Tales of Mars.
The Raven, yes. The Fall of the House of Usher. Some of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe envisioned pink elephants. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a lot under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He only lived 40 years.
Married his younger cousin, too.
Yeah, that too, yeah. But he did not live long. Again, but he's not in the book, so I looked him up and. But anyway, if you study American literature, you'll run into John Greenleaf Whittier, Walt Whitman, and Jonathan Edwards, which we did talk about. But some of these men, or if you study intellectual history of America, you'll run into Mark Twain and these men a lot in American literature. But this is an overall history class that more than anything else emphasizes politics.
Yeah.
All right. Railroads. The railroads was America's first big industry. We talked about that, I believe, a couple of lessons ago. The number one industry for a long time was the railroads. Now, but big. Unlike other industries, the railroads employed its employees scattered all over the country. Again, it's because of the nature of their business. Now, anyway, for instance, I spent 27 years at Lockheed. You may or may not know Lockheed is not just here in Marietta. Lockheed is scattered over the country.
Yeah, it's all over.
During World War II, the Germans and the Japanese had their factories all bunched and clumped together. We scattered ours out. Why scatter them out? Because if the Germans would have hit one, they would not hit us all. Whereas when we started bombing Germany, if we missed the one factory, we'd get the one next to it. So we wound up doing a lot of damage to their factories. But anyway, the railroads, though, were scattered. The employees were scattered. Owing again to the fact that the nature of their business was moving people, moving things. The government would give acres and acres of land to the railroads. Keep in mind, the government had a lot of cheap land in those days, where the government would give it to the railroads. The railroads would use to lay down a track, but what about the land that the railroads didn't need? Well, the railroads would simply sell it to private individuals. So the railroads would get the land for nothing, sell what they weren't using for their track to private people, and make a pretty handsome profit. In their younger days, the railroads became quite corrupt in that they showed favoritism toward the rich. They'd give rebates. In other words, if a rich man shipped maybe 1,000 head of cattle, the railroads would give him a lower price than a rebate. Now, to some extent, you can understand this, folks, because even today, if you buy bulk, you get cheaper than you do if you buy in small quantities. Nevertheless, this made it hard on the poor man. The poor man had to pay a higher price than the rich. But the railroads got a lot. Now, something else about the railroads. So, on one side of the track would live the rich. On the wrong side of the track would live the poor. And it became an expression, grew up on the wrong side of the track. The railroad track would separate communities into, again, because the railroad was a good ideal separator because it was dangerous to cross them. In those days, they didn't have very many, if any, overpasses or underpasses. So if you needed to cross from one side of the track to the other, you had to look really, really carefully and make sure no train was coming. Of course, those trains made a lot of noise. That's true. Then you would cross the track, but the track still made a barrier. And as far as crossing with a wagon over the track, you had to go to a place where they'd have places where you could get your wagon wheels over the track, like we still do today. But now, to this day, railroads are important because the rail is still the cheapest way to get a large volume of goods over land. Now, if you get stopped by a train and take the time to look at what they're hauling, a lot of times they're hauling big tanker cars, which is probably hauling oil, and there'll be maybe, 50 or more tankers, one after another, go by. Sometimes they're hauling automobiles, and you might see 15 automobiles on one car, one train car. And sometimes they're hauling trucks. The old-fashioned trucks have to haul wheels and all. But these newer trucks, they can take the wheels off, haul the truck where it's going, and then put another set of wheels on that truck when it gets to its destination. Do any of you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
You've seen these trucks on the back of a train. Well, see, this means that a lot of drivers are not having to be paid, so this means the goods can get across cheaper. A railroad will only need about 4 or 5 men maybe to operate it. Some of them sleeping or resting in a caboose while the other ones are up operating in the engine. But anyway, the railroads, yes.
They still use something similar to that today, with reference to how the maintenance guys who are maintenance in the rail, they have like those F-150 or 250, and they have like the wheels, they have regular wheels, but they have something where it turns and lines up with the track.
Yeah, oh yeah. In other words, if you need to turn to another track,
Yeah.
that I